Working. Says I'm live. All right. Looks like we're moving. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It's another Sunday morning live stream. I know normally it's at 10, but I have a busy day, got water changes, workout to do, so we're just going to get to it. Now, hopefully you can hear me all right. Hopefully, if not, let me know in the comments. But we got a lot to unpack today. We're going to talk about filtration, all the different kinds, pros and cons of each, some reviews of even some of the products I have, and we're going to talk about heaters. So there's a lot to talk about. We'll finish up with do we even need them? Some situations where you may not need either one or the other. So we'll talk about all that. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about oxygen in the aquarium because we talked about that last week. So this will be purely a lot of reviews and kind of ideas and where pitfalls and pros and cons of the various types of filtration that you can have in an aquarium. All right, so let's start with this. I wrote this up earlier. Oh, actually, you know what we're going to start with? That's the geranium and terrarium behind me, which if I can admit, the geranium definitely won. I'm almost embarrassed to show my terrarium. I am going to fix it, but unfortunately I had a bug infestation that destroyed all of the seedlings that I had put in there. I'm still trying to work with it. I hope the bigger plants can survive and won't die off. But I just don't know a lot about terrariums, and I'm not used to dealing with pest things other than really like snails. So anyway, I'll show you these two, and then we will hop right into the conversation because we do have a lot to talk about. Right. So then you can see both of those. So basically, here, I'll burn mine over. I can't. But you can basically see most of it's pretty much dead, unfortunately, because there's bugs crawling in and out, and I guess they just ate all of the roots or seedlings. I'm not even sure, but it was decimated within days. There's nothing I did really got rid of it, so that's unfortunate, but my girlfriend's tank is looking really good. Everything's actually growing in pretty well. Even the immersed grown stuff took very well without minimal melting back. So that's pretty exciting. I definitely am a much bigger geranium fan than terrariums, but I'm going to keep working on it and getting better as we go on. All right, enough of that side tangent. We're going to get on to the topic at hand, which is filtration. Now, this is my filtration board. Now, this is just the pros and cons of general hang-on backs, nothing in particular. And there are a lot more pros and cons that can go on this list. I may list a few of them as we're going through the other products, but these I figured were some of the most important ones to look at. So we're going to start with the hang-on back. That's your pretty common. Actually, I'll show you an example with my other one. So something like this is a hang-on back. Of course, as the name says, it hangs on the back of your aquarium. The pros to it, it's highly customizable. That little container in the side will allow you to put kind of whatever you want in there, whether it's, in some cases, you can do plants, you can do carbon phosphate remover, you can do sponge, plenty of options. Basically, you can do whatever you want as long as it fits in that side. You know, I've done things even of hanging pothos on the hang-on back and letting the roots suck out nutrients and produce oxygen. So that I like a lot. It's cheap for the most part. In terms of bang for your buck, I think these are pretty good because they will last you a pretty long time. They are good for it's cheap to get one for a pretty large tank. That's what I'm trying to say. I have aqua clears here that we will talk about in a second that can do 50, 70 gallons, and it might have cost me $25, $30 for that filter at the time, and they still run to this day. So that's almost a decade at this point. So really good quality in some of them. We'll talk about it. High oxygen transfer. So because of all the running water that's splashing down from the top, like you can see in this picture, there's a lot of area for water ripples and oxygen transfer, like we talked about in last week's live stream. And then it is good water movement. That's really important to keep algae down in a lot of cases. Some of these, like the sponge filter, do not get very good water movement, which can lead to algae issues. So those are the pros. Cons, it can be hard to clean. There's a lot of parts to clean. Sponges, whatever you put inside of there, you have to do the piping. You should do the impeller as well. All of that means a lot of maintenance for one single hang-on back. And lots of parts, as I just mentioned, a lot of areas for things to break. The impeller is the most common one, but other areas you can get leaks or cracks, things like that, which can be a problem. And last, it's loud. If your water level is not very high, it can become very loud in the tent or in the room, which some people are bothered by. Obviously, because my fish room's in a separate room of the house, it doesn't really bother us that much, so it's nice. And the range, it could probably go higher. The AquaClear 110, as the name states, it runs up to 110 gallons, but I would really do no more than up to 100. I probably personally would do no more than like 90, just to stay on the safe side, and I still would probably add more filtration. But moving on, next is the sponge. These are probably the cheapest option. It takes one of these little air pumps, some airline tubing, and this guy. So that makes it pretty easy to set up, nearly foolproof, and it is very cheap to get all of those components. And if you get a big enough one of these, this can do 2 tanks, and that's even easier and a bit cheaper. They're easy to maintain, obviously, with something like this. There we go. White background helps. You can take the sponge off. You just squeeze it out in the water that you did a water change in. Important to remember. And it's clean. And then you can put it back on. So easy to maintain, perfect for a shrimp tank because there's very little flow. The shrimp aren't very big on flow. They don't really need it. It provides a great media for the shrimp to feed on. They love to eat on these little filter sponges here. They'll climb all over it to gather bacteria and other pieces of food that have gotten stuck onto it. And there's high oxygen, obviously, because it's connected to an air pump that creates tons and tons of oxygen in the tank, so you never have to worry about it being well oxygenated. And there's no leaks. I really got to stop saying I'm going to work on it. Getting better. At least I noticed the problem. So the sponge here, it's inside the tank. It can't leak, because if it did leak, all it would do was leak into the tank and you still wouldn't have to worry about that problem. Now, the cons, there is little water movement. It doesn't move a ton of water. It does move water at the surface, creating lots of ripples, but underneath, it doesn't do a lot of water flow. Again, that's good for things like shrimp and fry tanks, but for most aquariums, it's not going to be enough flow, especially if you're trying to grow plants and keep algae down. Flow is important. Some gunk built up, some of them gunk can build up very easily. Now that all has to do with porosity of the sponge. You see, this sponge is actually very fine. It'll filter the water very fine, but that means it gets gunked up very fast and it takes a lot more to clean out, which can be a pain in the butt. It can reduce flow and it doesn't work as well, in my opinion, for bacteria. So these I'm not a big fan of. You want to get a much more coarse sponge. Places like Aquarium Co-op or Amazon or Aquabid or basically anywhere, any local fish store should sell a coarse sponge filter that you can easily get. One more pro that I just thought about is you can easily take this from an established tank and move it into a new tank and very quickly seed that. It's very easy to do if you just take this sponge filter or even one of the sponges off, put it in a new tank, squeeze it out, seed it. Or you can take it from, if you bought fish somewhere, maybe from a local hobbyist, and they have a sponge filter and they're willing to give it to you, and you can take it with the fish. You already have an established media that you can put in the tank with the fish so that you know it'll all work out well. So that's a very big pro. Again, you can also do that for transportation if you're taking it to a show or an exhibition or something. Established media will help them be safer on the drive or the travel, whichever way you're going. The last con is it can be hard to hide. It's pretty obvious in most tanks. You could use some stem plants and things to hide it, but for the most part, it's going to be pretty tough to conceal. That's why it's better as a fry tank or a shrimp tank where you really don't care what it looks like. It's mostly for in a breeding setup. Anyway, the range here would be up to 40. You could add more and do more larger tanks if you did, say, 2 or 3 sponges, depending on their size. But really, at that point, I feel like you might as well just get a hang-on back or an external or a canister or something like that. So next is the internal. One of the positives, again, is no leaks. Obviously, if it's inside the tank, it can't leak. Easy to maintain. You can basically unplug it. They usually have a little chamber like, other side, this guy that you can just pull off and you take it into your aquarium. You take it into your water change water. I can't think of the words right now. But you would put it in the water change water, squeeze it out, and put it right back on. So again, like the sponge filter, very easy to take care of. Ideal for paludariums and ripariums. I don't have it exactly on hand, but I will show you a good example for that works well to do waterfall type effects or some kind of water movement if you want a water basin in the bottom of a paludarium or riparium. Something that I'm hoping here in the near future we can start working on so that you all can kind of see what I'm talking about when I refer to this and just get to see an interesting experience that I will be excited to try. But we'll cross that bridge when we fall off of it. It's easy to conceal. In some cases, something like this may not be super easy to conceal, but some of them are very small and can be very easy to conceal with a false wall or even plants. So that, or if you get an all-in-one, that's usually what you're going to get. If you get a plug-and-play type, like the Fluval Flex, that I have the Road Less Traveled that you can see in one of my fish room tours, or Dragonstone or Winterfell, any of those are all what I would consider a plug and play, and they all use an internal canister filter. Another option is like a submersible pump. These are all internal canisters of one kind or another. This pump doesn't really have a lot of media, but it can move water and you can attach media to it. So some cons, it can gunk up very easy. These guys I used to use for turtle tanks when I was younger, and they gunked up very fast and they would start getting loud and it can be very obnoxious, so you have to clean them a lot. Depending on what you're keeping in there will all depend on that, but for turtles it was like weekly at the very least, and it probably should have been multiple times a week. So that can be a bit of a problem. Two, there's little biologic. This chamber, this is for a 40, and the biologic in here is probably about the size of my hand. So not a lot of space for beneficial bacteria to grow, which can be a problem. But again, that depends on what you're putting in there, if your stock load's very light, or if you have some kind of other method like a sponge filter or something that's helping with more bacteria. They can be hard to hide. This one can be hard to hide. Some of them, this guy would be a little hard to hide. So some of them can be very easy to conceal. Some of them are very hard because there are so many different kinds. And the range, I would probably put up to 40 gallons. I don't think anything would, for my personal opinion, a internal canister couldn't handle anything more than a 40-gallon tank. But that's just my opinion. Some people may argue that you can do larger ones with higher gallonage, but again, that's just my 2 cents. A canister filter. Now, unfortunately, I don't have one of these. I don't actually use any of them. But the pros to them, they're highly customizable. You can, because there's a large chamber for media, you can put lots of things down there. Usually, most of them offer several trays, and you can put whatever you want in those trays. Bio balls, sponge filters, filter floss, whatever you want to do, whatever your goals are, that external or the canister filter works very well for this. Lots of bio. As I just mentioned, there's tons of space for biological media if you just want to max out on biological, but you can also do plenty of other things. Can use a CO2 reactor. So one of the things that the hang-on back, the sponge, and the internal do not really possess is the ability to use a CO2 reactor, which is probably the most effective way of getting CO2 into your aquarium. Now, with that said, and we talked about last week, it can be very easy to gas your fish that way. So you have to be careful with that. But if you're trying to do a planted tank, a canister filter can be a great way to get maximum CO2 uptake into the aquarium, so you can really pump out those plants and get light, nice, bright colors, keep the algae down, the whole spiel. And if you don't, watch last week's live stream there. All right. So that can be very helpful. Minimally invasive. So all you usually see is the lily pipes, or the little pipes that hang into the aquarium, the inflow and the outflow, which can very easily be hidden. So it makes great for aquascaping, keeping all of that filtration and everything out of the tank. And usually if you get a stand with it, you can just hide the canister in the stand, and then you don't even see the filtration at all, which a hang-on back, an internal, and a sponge, it can be concealed, but it can be a little bit trickier, and it's a lot more stuff to conceal. Cons. They're one of the more expensive options. In terms of these, it's probably the most expensive that you're going to see every day. Your average everyday hobbyist will could have a canister filter, but they get a little pricey. They can be hard to clean because there's piping running down. Sometimes that dribbles on the floor. You can get little spills and leaks, and you have to take it into the sink and rinse it out. It can be a process to clean this thing all out, which you should be doing monthly, really. And it can gas fish. As I mentioned earlier, if you don't have enough water flow, because the canister filters all contained inside is filled with water, there's not much air getting in there. You can easily gas the fish if you're not creating ripples at the surface or adding oxygen in some other fashion. Now, the upside to these is it can also go up to 300 gallons. So I think the FX6 actually says 400. I probably would push no more than 300, but that's a lot of gallonage without having to do a sump. So that can be really great if you're not a tech or a DIY handsy person or wants to deal with a sump, because it is a lot to take on as well. It's basically a second tank in itself. And last, the sump. This is the most customizable. There's endless options that you can do with a sump. You can basically put anything in there. As I mentioned earlier, it is a second tank. You can raise fry in there so that it has all the biologic you need. You can use a refugium. I've seen that before, where people have plants that they grow in the tank at night, so it provides oxygen and takes nutrients out during the night. And then the plants in the display tank actually take them out during the day and produce oxygen there when the lights in the sump are off. So tons and tons of options. I could go on for hours about the options a sump has. It's basically endless. If you can dream it and figure out a way how to do it, you can put it in a sump pretty much. High oxygen. Because a lot of them are wet dries or like trickle downs, I unfortunately don't have. Ooh, hold on just a moment. I do actually have a picture I can show you. Ugh. The perks of collecting aquarium books is that sometimes they have good pictures. So, real quick, that's a canister filter, or one kind of canister filter. This would be something like a sump. It's similar. It can be like a wet dry, like this, where the water runs down from a pipe and then it trickles down onto bioballs, creating lots of oxygenation, creating lots of biological material, and then that sponge down there will have lots of biologic, and you can add more, but that's the basic idea with a sump. Now, you normally will see it with a drilled tank, which is a con, in my opinion, because drilling can be very hard. You need a diamond tip saw and yada yada. It's a whole route that we're not going to talk about today. There's plenty of videos out there for that. Okay, going back to this though, but that creates a lot of oxygen transfer. That trickle effect creates lots of oxygenation, just like a rainfall would, and it's basically a continuous rainfall. So you don't have to worry about oxygen being depleted in your tank with a method like that. It's unseen. Like the canister filter, you can easily hide it underneath. And if you have a sump, you almost definitely will be hiding it underneath there with some kind of stand in nice cabinetry or just a basic cabinet. But you will be hiding it in some fashion. So you don't really notice the sump, which makes the display tank look that much nicer. And it can use a CO2 reactor because it does plumbing. You can easily plumb a CO2 reactor in there. Or if you use flex tubing, you can do that as well. The sump doesn't necessarily need to be drilled into. It can just be run with flex tubing to a pump. And again, a whole process we don't need to talk about. If you're interested, leave a comment down below. I'll be happy to talk about it. It's something that I deal with a lot as my profession, but I just don't have one at home. Anyway, the cons, it's expensive. It's basically a second tank. There's plumbing. There's lots of work that's going to go into it. So it can be a bit pricey to put a sump together. You can't take it with you. It can be done, hypothetically, but generally it's a big pain in the butt. So the easiest thing to do really is to leave it or sell it off when you're done with it. That's what you're most often going to see. It's just too much of a piece to move, and oftentimes it's just plumbed with the tank, which makes it very, very hard to remove and take with you. So basically not worthwhile. And then the range, the very biggest con to a sump is there's basically no limit, because you can change the size of the sump and the amount of filtration and all of these other things. A sump is basically limitless because it's a second tank. Essentially, you can have your display tank be as big as you want as long as your sump can accommodate that. So those are the various types. For the most part, there is one more, which is an under gravel filter, which you don't see very often, but basically oxygen, like a sponge filter, is pumped down to the bottom. It shakes up the gravel a little bit, creating oxygen in that gravel, which is now the media, and it will allow for bacteria to form on that gravel, therefore having all of the bacteria and everything within the tank itself. Pretty minimally invasive, but you don't see it very often anymore. They're kind of rare to find, but they actually are a pretty good way of taking care of your tank. That one is actually very helpful because you can just add more trays and you can do larger and larger tanks, and it would still basically do anything that these do as well. So that's another good option. All right. So we're going to talk about some various products that I have here. I know we're already at the 26-minute mark, but we've gone over a lot of the information. So now I'm just going to talk pros and cons of what I like and what I don't like about some of these. And then we'll finish up with heaters and do you need heaters and filtration in your tank? All right, sip of coffee done. First, the hang-on back, this Cascade 80. I believe it's for a 10-gallon tank. Real simple. I mean, almost every brand under the sun makes something like this. It works. Last time I tried it, I will probably be using it again here shortly on that build that I promised you all. That should be happening in 2 weeks, just so you all know. But you can see it needs a cleaning. But it's your basic hang-on back, and hopefully it works. We'll see in a couple weeks, but yeah, that's about all I got for that. And now I'll go back in the box. Submersible pump. I don't actually have this with me. I wouldn't really use this as biological media. Basically, this is just going to add filtration. It could be good in combination with a sponge filter. I also use it as the Venturi effect. Excuse me, a concept we talked about last week. So watch last week's live stream if you don't know what that means. But I use this with the Venturi effect for CO2, but you could also use it for oxygen. I just wouldn't use this as a primary biological source. But it's okay. It works as promised, and it's still working. These Whisper 40s, this is your pretty common run-of-the-line, basic, everyday PetSmart air pump. It's a diaphragm air pump. They work for a long time. They don't break all that easy, and you use them for things like sponge filters or air stones if you're just trying to add more air. You also have this doodad. This, I guess, is technically an internal or sponge filter. You could call it either, but I bought this originally for the bird cage. I think there's a video about the history of my fish tanks, part 1 or something, that lost my train of thought, that shows this. Originally, it worked pretty well, and then things started to get gunked up, and when I went to clean it, it just exploded, as you can maybe see here. Like, not even all of it's back in the container. The container's still busted open. So it never continued to work. I mean, it runs and it flows air, but it doesn't work very well. And it also wants to float, which becomes a huge, obvious object when it's like floating sideways in your tank. So not a great product. It was very cheap. I was on a budget. I may try and hot rod it later. Possibly for this upcoming tank build, we'll see. So you might see this again in a hot rodded video, kind of a DIY project. So I have some ideas for that. This guy, as I mentioned, this has been used for turtles in the past. Well, yeah. And it's okay. I've never actually used these for a fish tank because I don't find them very useful for a fish tank. But basically, there's your biologic. You could again, hot rod this however you want. You could add sponge and stuff. There's plenty of more space for extra biomaterial, but that's about it. And then you just snap this thing onto place and it would run. So it's okay, but I wouldn't use it particularly. I just have one because it was given to me as for free, basically. Sponge filters. Again, I don't like this one personally, but because these are so fine, let me see. I don't know if you all can see that, but it's pretty fine. So it means it gets gunked up very easily and it takes forever to squeeze out. Usually if I'm doing a water change, I'll need to like squeeze this in several buckets of dirty fish water. So before it's finally clean, it can take forever. It's a real pain, which can make the flow even less. But these guys themselves are okay. I'd probably just take this off, use these little these are called, it's a tea air sponge filter, but you could easily add some hot rodded sponges or coarser sponges onto this thing, and that would work out really well. So easily fixed, but the product itself as bought isn't that great. This is the AquaClear 110, made by Hagen. They don't make these anymore because Fluval absorbed Hagen. So Fluval now I think makes their own thing, which is just basically the AquaClear 110. But this is the gold standard, if you are to ask me. 75 gallons and below, I would get an AquaClear every single time. They're extremely customizable. There's tons of space in the back. That's the 110. I have that one currently on my 40, so you can watch a fish room tour if you want to see that. Hold on. But this is the AquaClear 50, I think. It's either the 50 or 70. I can't remember. I don't have the box for this one anymore. But this is it. It's real simple, basic. But you see that? That's tons of canister space or tons of media space. You can easily pull it out like this and put it back in. You can customize it with whatever you want. This is just a small amount of sponge. I could easily double that and then add like a fine filter floss on top of it like I do for my 40 gallon. Also, I like the fact you can see through this. So if I'm looking through the back of my tank and this is not covered by a background, I can tell when it's dirty and when it needs to be cleaned. So if it were me, I would buy these almost every day of the week. This is my gold standard for filtration or, yeah. I mean, I can't say enough good things about the AquaClear because they're durable. They're crazy durable. That's lasted me 10 years and it's still chugging along like it's day one. So awesome. Can't say enough good things. Unfortunately, Hagen doesn't exist, but Fluval still offers that product. One side note that I forgot to mention. Oh, Fluval 70. Sorry. That is actually, I guess, the Fluval 70, which would have been the AquaClear 70 had it been made by Hagen. Exact same concept. Anyway, one other thing I forgot to mention is internal filters. These guys, you have to be careful because they can, especially if they get gunked up, produce a lot of heat, which can raise the temperature of your water, which can be a problem. So most of the other filters, hang-on backs might do a little bit, but most of the other filters won't really have that filtration or that heating problem. So that's something you need to keep an eye on, which we're going to talk about heaters here in a second. But we're going to get through these. This is I think it's like an Exoterra, no, a Repto filter. I think this is by like Tetra or something. I used, I think, two of these for a turtle tank back in the day. It worked okay. It's not, very minimal canister space. It got gunked very easily, so wasn't the biggest fan of this, but it was old school. It's still pretty easy to clean and everything, but I wouldn't really recommend that. So this thingy is another internal canister or an internal filter. This is one that I would use for a riparium or paludarium because it has this hole. You can easily get flexible tubing or like PVC and put it in there and then run it to whatever distance or height this will allow. You got to do some physicsy engineering stuff to figure out head pressure and static pressure. But usually there's diagrams and things that will help you figure that out, or this will tell you maximum height or something like that. But these are good for your plug and plays. These are good for like a riparium, vivarium type deal. So this is pretty decent. This one I don't like a lot because it's pretty dinky and it stopped working very easily. So pretty cheap one, but other ones can be much better quality and rather customizable. So, and then last we'll talk about is this guy. Now, I'm not putting it all together because there's lots and lots of hosing like this, and you can add another one and it can go even further down. This thing reaches like 3 feet down in the water column. So that's a plus. It can reach really low, but this is the Penguin Bio Wheel 20, I think is for a 20 gallon. This thing sucks. I always take this thing off because it'll sit here and it'll spin like once like the first time it runs great. And then like after a month, or if you clean it once, it'll do like, that's it the whole time. It's so frustrating. So that was unfortunate. But in terms of space, it does have a decent amount of space, especially for a 20 gallon. So you could hot rod this with lots of biologic, which makes it not that bad. But I've also found that this one can be a bit more loud, which I don't love a lot compared to the Aqua Clear. All right. So those are all of the hang-on backs, internals, externals, all that. So we're done with filtration for the moment. We're going to come back to it. But next we're going to talk about heaters. So this is a precision submersible heater. I've got tons of other heaters. Some of them have little dials on top that you can adjust the temperature. Some of them are already preset. I don't really like those. The important thing is you want to make sure they're UL rated. Some of these are really nice and will actually last a really long time, like this one by Hydor. I'm pretty sure runs, even though it still looks pretty crappy. It's had no problem last time I ran it. So, and I'm pretty sure I tested all these a few months back. But they say 5 watts per gallon, or yes, 5 watts per gallon. So that means 50 watts. This one says it heats up to 70 gallons. I would probably run it at 50. And if I'm to recommend something, honestly, it would be you run 2 heaters just in case one burns out, the other starts working. Again, this is if you're going to go that heater route. This is an Aqueon one. It's a preset at 78 degrees. I don't really like that, but they are pretty cheap. You can easily find them on Facebook Marketplace or Let Go or OfferUp. People are always selling these for really cheap. But yeah, this is another, I don't even know what brand this is, but some of them have little casing, some have quartz sleeving. So there's lots of different kinds. But do you really need one? Most cases, no, is going to be my answer, actually. Now, there's reasons I say that, but we're going to get to that there's reasons I say that. So one is, if your aquarium is in your house, you probably will keep it at a comfortable temperature for you, which means in a lot of cases, that's a comfortable temperature for the fish, depending on how you are. If you're like us and your temperature in the house doesn't get below 74, you have nothing to worry about. If you live in a cold state where it actually can get 30 in the house, or you keep it rather cool like 69, depending on the fish, it still may be okay. But if it's too hot or too cold, some fish like guppies may start to fall apart. But a lot of fish, I think, can tolerate even something as low as 69 degrees. And you have to think about the heat that your components are producing and the heat that is trapped within the aquarium. So that's why I would say one of these is a pretty good investment. Just as a precaution, you don't really need it, but I don't think it hurts. They're like $1 or something. I actually think I got these on Wish and they were like free. But you just drop this little probe in there and this will tell you the temperature. Real easy, real simple. You can put some suction cups on it or something to keep it in place, but I think that is at least a good precaution. In most cases, I still don't think a heater is necessary. The exceptions. I need some coffee. The exceptions to that rule would be discus. They really need a warm temperature, or if you do have really cold temperatures or really hot temperatures, but hot temperatures, you really need a chiller or some kind of fan. So cold temperatures really, and that could be a basement. So if you're running a fish room in a basement, that may be helpful to get some of these, or just heat your basement is probably the easiest way to do it. So that's why I don't think in a lot of cases heaters are necessary. I have a bunch just in case it starts to get really cold, and I may try and use some of them to run my pond over the winter with guppies in it, but otherwise I definitely don't think you need one. So do you need a filter? Well, that one's a bit trickier. A lot of people will hang me at the stake for saying no. In some cases, you don't. In what would those cases be? Well, one, like behind me, is a geranium. Now, if there's nothing living in it, you don't need one, obviously. Now, if there is something living in it, yeah, I still say no in a lot of cases. And that's only because it depends on the type. Shrimp, snails, and anabantoids are the three things that I would say you are okay to have in a container that has plants and is large enough to contain the life that you want to put in there. So what that means is this geranium behind me, I could put snails, maybe some shrimp in. That might happen in the future. They require very little oxygen. The plants will produce enough oxygen and they can find food. The plants, leaves will fall apart and those plants or those shrimp can eat that. So I think that's totally doable. I also think in my larger terrarium, which is a few gallons of water, probably about 3 gallons of water, I could put a beta or some kind of anabantoid, a gourami, or something that gulps air at the surface in there, and it would do fine. It has plenty of coverage. There's lots of plants to give oxygen in the tank and keep the water clean for a fish of that size. Again, the reason I wouldn't do that here is because it's not enough space, I think, for a beta, and there isn't enough plants to take out the biologic that a beta would produce. So those are the only situations I can really think of that it would be allowed. So other than that, I would say yes, you do need a filter of some kind. If nothing else, you need oxygen in the tank. That's probably going to be your first problem. The biologic will come with oxygen. So that's the most important thing. Heaters, again, not that important unless you're raising hot water fish, which I mentioned discus being the most common. But cool water fish do not really need anything like this, even in very cold temperatures. Things like white clouds, things like danios, things like plecos, even things like goldfish, they're all cool water fish, so they don't like to be that warm, and so a heater will never be necessary in those situations. Well, I think that's about all I have on filtration for today, as well as heaters. Next week will be the final wrap up in 101, which is lighting. So I will be talking a good deal about different kinds of lights, mostly LEDs, because let's be honest, people don't really use T5s or T8s that much anymore. So we'll talk a little in depth on that. And then the following week should be the live stream for the tank build that I am going to do. So I'm super excited about it. I already have a really good plan in mind. I just need a week or two to gather all the materials up, get everything I need, and then we can have a nice fun video that I will tell you plenty ahead of time when it is, so you all can be near the computer and watch this tank build, or even do a tank build with me at the same time. That would be a lot of fun too. Anyway, next week, lighting, final week will be the put it all together. We'll talk a little, we'll wrap up in conversation everything in next week's live stream after we talk about lighting. And then the final video is really just going to be putting it all together, because that's going to take a little while. So I don't want to ramble for very long on that video. I just want to watch, or I want you all to watch and enjoy the tank being put together. And I'll probably kind of talk about why I'm doing what I'm doing. All right, well, I hope people could hear this video. I hope my microphone was loud enough. No one said anything in the comments, but I don't even know if anyone was really around for this video. But hopefully you guys look at it later, because I think it does have a lot of good content. But if you like this video and you found it helpful, a like is always appreciated. If you want more aquarium stuff or are excited for upcoming fitness stuff, you will be... please subscribe to my channel. You can turn on notifications. I'm going to try and be better about posting these live streams ahead of time. It is still tricky right now, but in the next month or so, I should be able to get down into a nice rhythm of exactly when I'm going to do it every Sunday, probably. And any comments? I know there weren't a lot of people on right now, so if you have any comments about filtration, different kinds of filters, heaters, anything like that, I've worked with them all. I know a pretty good deal about most of these things. If so, leave a comment down below if you have any questions about that, or really any questions about aquariums in general. And if you want more regular content, I would say find me on Facebook or Instagram at Fitman Aquatics. And that way you can see more of the regular pictures. One final comment I forgot to mention, or a few final comments I want to wrap up with. One, after the build, I will be taking a break for the most part from the YouTubing of aquariums. I will still put out monthly videos on what's happening in the fish room and all the terrariums and everything like that, because that's great documentation for me, and I enjoy the replies and thoughts from everyone else that I get from those videos, so that's greatly appreciated. But past that, I don't see too many other aquarium videos going out for a little while, and the reason for that is I am going to be switching gears so I don't get burnt out of aquariums, if that's even possible. But I'm going to be switching gears nonetheless to go and do lots more fitness videos. I think those will be easier for me to put out, and I do want to put out a lot of that content because I do have a lot of live streaming ideas as well as exercise videos that I want to put out, so you all can watch that and hopefully motivate some people to work out or change up their workout maybe a little bit. So that is, and so the last part, it is the 26th of July. My goal is within the next week, so beginning of August or the very end of this month, I will have the July fish room tour completed. And am planning on cleaning up the tanks today, doing some trimming, all of that good stuff, so that I can do some recording tomorrow and through this week, and then put it all together. And I should hopefully have it out for you all by next Sunday is my goal. Let's see, let's say next Sunday. And on top of that, the medicated gel video that I had done last week is finally finished editing, and that should be coming out tomorrow afternoon is when I'm planning on dropping that video. So lots more fish room videos coming up in the next couple weeks. Stay tuned for all these fun activities, and I will catch you all in the next video.